So this is a talk for the Mount Haemus lecture, and it's called Druidry and Transpersonal History. Firstly, 1. What exactly is transpersonal history? I defined it during my doctoral research as the combination of the entire gamut of professional historical scientific research, plus the added-in extra of the insights culled from modern transpersonal psychology. That is to say, it is a branch or sub-discipline of the historical sciences, along with, say, economic history, social history, political history, etc., which focuses on the spiritual life of mankind, the peak experiences, insights, enlightenment experiences, paranormal experiences, moments of inspiration, maximum creativity, breakthrough moments, etc., the capacity for love and altruism, moments of aha and when. This branch of psychology, transpersonal psychology, arose out of the work of numerous thinkers, including Carl Jung, Assagioli, Abraham Maslow, Stan Grof, Sorokin, Viktor Frankl, Jean Gebser, James Fadiman, Ken Wilber, and many others in the course of the 20th century. It arose partly in contradistinction to the school of psychoanalysis associated with Freud, which focused on the pathologies that people get into, the negative states, the depressions, neuroses, horrors, and cruelties. It was realised by many advanced thinkers in psychology and its auxiliary disciplines that some people exhibit states of maximum well-being, happiness, creativity, and wisdom, and that psychology should also study these states. So, in the last 30 years or so, transpersonal psychology has come of age. It's established research institutes, MA courses, academic journals, and led to a huge cultural outflowing of books, talk shows, websites, and even movies. It's very much the zeitgeist of the now. What I argued, as a historian, however, in trying to study the intellectual history of peacemaking and war prevention in the crucial period of world history from 1945 to 2001, is that by and large the historical profession is stuck with a 19th century model of psychology. Historians still write in terms of Newtonian physics and even pre-Freudian psychology. States have interests, power is the name of the game, and meaning is always relative. Thus the subtleties of mankind's will to meaning, or meta-needs, or the craving people still feel for pattern, depth and content in their lives, has somehow eluded them. What I argued is that the resurgence of religious conflict and religious paradigm clashes in the modern post-Cold War world can only be understood against a historical meta-paradigm that includes transpersonal psychology as its foundation. Another way of talking about transpersonal history would therefore be to say it is the scientific study of the esoteric dimensions of history, which is not exactly the same as saying it is the history of esotericism. In transpersonal psychology, there is the scientific recognition that human beings do have spiritual experiences, that strange states of altered consciousness are in fact quite common, that ever since the early Paleolithic mankind has experimented with consciousness-altering drugs and found that when handled correctly they can provide interesting insights and life-changing revelations, that sexuality is as often as not a revelatory experience, and that love definitely includes a strong element of the supernatural, or at the very least, telepathy. And that angels, deities, prophets, miracles, mystical insights, enlightenments, past life regressions, clairvoyance, clairaudience, synchronicities, precognitive dreams, telepathy, and the experiences of joy and deep meaning and inner peace are all widely reported and widely documented phenomena. Not just in the hagiographies of saints, but also in ordinary people's lives. Thus, the field I'm naming transpersonal history would combine the best insights of professional historical research, meaning attention to sources, lack of bias, thoroughness in research methods, sympathy for the subject matter, a willingness to follow where the evidence leads, a love of books and literature and scholarship, a commitment to study, education, knowledge, rational thought, etc., with an openness to research the sometimes strange material that the transpersonal dimension throws up. Of course, for a historian who denies the existence of such paranormal or transpersonal phenomena, Transpersonal history would be at best a strange study of deviant intellectual history, the weird beliefs of strange sects. And there are some intellectual historians who adopt this kind of arm's length approach, which is indeed sometimes necessary. To be a good transpersonal historian doesn't mean that one swallows every single miracle in the literature as if it were true. One can still deconstruct the context of the narrative. For example, for a transpersonal historian to write the history of the early Celtic Church in Ireland would require a great deal of sifting out. Which stories, legends and miracles might be based in fact, which might be based on second-hand hearsay, and what are facts anyway. For example, in the famous confrontation of the then Archdruid and St Patrick at Tara, when the Druid was held aloft in the air, in what sense is this a true report? What might have actually happened in this encounter? And from whose side would one listen to the true version of events? The Druid side of the story has never been told, so far as I know, because in imposing Roman alphabetic literacy, the Christians imposed the medium in which history would henceforth be told. Orality as a vehicle of truth was somehow diminished and lessened and cheapened. Truth and history was now equated with what is written. Druids, however, also practiced history as a high art, but theirs was the oral and bardic kind. They spoke the past and kept it alive by speaking it, reciting it, memorising it, and singing it as bards. This was how the ancient king lists of Ireland were retained well into the era of the medieval Christian chroniclers, who finally wrote them down. This was how the Druid traditions of the succeeding waves of invasions into Ireland and the stories of the roles of the Druids involved, and also in Wales, was preserved generation after generation. Transpersonal history also acknowledges, therefore, that all forms of remembrance are valid as historical records. The written form, archives, the spoken kind, oral, and even the thought kind, the termers, or Akashic records. The question I want to explore in this lecture, then, is this. To what extent might this new concept of transpersonal history be of value in helping us to understand, appreciate, reconstruct, and value the heritage and history of Druidry? As a brief foray into a potentially very large topic, this lecture will be a scouting mission, reporting on a huge, unexplored terrain, which hopefully future generations of scholars can open up inch by inch and mile by mile. My job here is to chart the overall coastlines of the work to be done. Others can come later and fill in the details. Firstly then, the nature of time itself. This is a theme of great significance to Druids. Druidry often plays with time. The work of the ovate is about understanding the patterns and rhythms behind time. We know that Druids and ovates were sometimes especially skilled at prognostication, and both classical and medieval and living sources confirm this. Transpersonal history has always been interested in the strangeness of time. Time seems to move in spirals. We repeat patterns, get stuck in grooves of samenesses, like going round and round in the ditch at Avebury, repeating the same old mistakes, until we finally advance and move up a notch. And next time we repeat the thing, it ends happier, like the labyrinth that Geoffrey Ashe and others explore in the slopes of Glastonbury Tor. Often in Celtic art, we can reconstruct the metaphysics of Druidry, and from the labyrinths and spiral patterns which the Celts so loved, we can tell they adored and understood the complex meanderings of time, as it plays with our karma and weird, as we all roll along the path to enlightenment. Many Celtic stories tell the same tale. The sage who wanders into fairyland, where time is different. This is true of the father of Gwion Bach, who found his bride in fairyland. It is also the experience of True Thomas, the rhymer, the Scottish sage who on Huntly Bank spies a maiden all in green and follows her down to fairyland. It is true of the way that all good fairy tales begin, once upon a time. What this is saying is, this tale you're about to hear is eternally true. It is a forever story, not simply a one-off story. Now, transpersonal psychology has also studied the weird and strange psychology of precognition. How it is that some people seem to know things that are going to happen before they do. Spiritualists sometimes can access this data that normally would be locked up in the future. Psychologists have also looked at precognitive dreams, when people report having dreams that later come true, sometimes down to very minute details. Akin to this is the kind of precognitive behaviour exhibited by good astrologers. Sometimes they seem to be able to predict what will happen in the future. The same is true of good practitioners of the tarot or other divination tools, such as the I Ching or palmistry, etc. How exactly does all this work? How is it possible that consciousness can access the future in what to us is the present? What can transpersonal history say about this? The answer would seem to be that spiritually advanced practitioners have the capacity to purify consciousness to the state that they can pick up on signals of events before they've actually materialised in the real world. Before a forest fire or an earthquake or other natural disaster, animals will often be seen leaving the area for hours or sometimes days beforehand. They seem to have a sixth sense that knows disaster is imminent. How does this work? I call it eagle vision, the ability to soar so high above the everyday that you can see what's coming next month, next year, or next millennium, as if it's just down the valley. And since events seem to follow constant karmic laws, you can kind of tell what's going to hit next. There are hints of this strange power as abounding in Druidry. When Henry Tudor was getting ready to go off to Bosworth to reclaim the throne of Britain for his Celtic forebears, he met with a soothsayer who predicted his victory. And there are countless other such examples in the literature. It would be a fine thing to collect them all, to classify and catalogue all the references to this druidic ability to foretell future events. St. Columba, the Christian druid, was also famous for having this ability, as recounted in the biography of St. Adomnan. There's an important job for future transpersonal historians. It's not necessarily a supernatural ability, but simply supernatural. Perhaps these phenomena should collectively be called foreseeings. Then, there's the equally fascinating question of synchronicities. Now, although Jung named the phenomenon of synchronicities, he didn't invent the phenomenon. If you think about it, it's what the whole science of augury was based on. A flock of birds flies in a particular shape, and thus we know that such and such an event is going to occur in such and such a way. It's to do with the unfolding of patterns, or simulacra, on various levels of being. So, an authentic priest-druid or ovate could tell how events will spin out from reading the signs that occur in the microcosm. Jung defined synchronicity as an acausal connecting principle that underpins the occurrence of simultaneous events, which are connected logically or spiritually, but cannot be connected causally in the way that we understand the normal laws of time and space. Watch out for synchronicities in your own life, and you'll know what this means. But are there also synchronicities in wider historical epochs and fields? Spotting the synchronicities is a fascinating game for transpersonal macro historians to play. For example, why did the Mahayana schools of Buddhism, which emphasized compassion and the salvation of all beings, begin in northern India and the Himalayas at exactly the same moment as Christianity was starting in Palestine? This is an example of spiritual synchronicity at work on a macro level. Likewise, why did Darwin and A.R. Wallace both come up with the principle of evolution through natural selection, both at about exactly the same time? This happens again and again. Someone thinks of an idea, and days later you hear that someone else had thought of it halfway around the world at about the same time. Jung didn't live long enough to attempt an explanation for the working of synchronicity, but he would surely have argued that it points to a third principle in the space-time continuum that Einstein had already sketched out. Einstein had pointed out masterfully that events in time and events in space are truly interconnected. These two media are simply dimensions for occurrences which are fundamentally energy exchanges taking place, like complex space-time love affairs. Jung would have said, aha, but psyche, soul, consciousness, the collective anima, is the third dimension, which gives coherence and meaning to these events. Time and space are both occurrences in the anima mundi. Physicists like Claude Curling and David Bohm and David Peat have tried to grapple with the implications of this idea. Bohm said there must be therefore some deep structure underlying particle physics, which provides the grid lines, so to speak, around which phenomena occur and interact. Transpersonal history then would want to study all the occurrences of synchronicity that have occurred in the lives of Druids, both modern and ancient, according to both the preserved literature as well as according to our own personal memories. Another strange synchronicity of history, Jesus of Nazareth being crucified for standing up against the Roman military machine, just a decade or so before the same Roman military machine launches an all-out war against Celtic Britannia. Why? And as St. Columba noticed a little later, the core teachings of Christ seemed so similar to the core teachings of the Druids that many argued Christ must have been partly tutored by Druid elders. Coincidence or synchronicity? Again, it's a job for future historians of the transpersonal to count up and catalogue and classify all those kinds of synchronicities, and then put them into a poem maybe, or a song, or weave it as a tapestry. Now, the second section is on Jung and the transpersonal and Druidry. I mentioned Jung just now, and I want to acknowledge him as one of the primary influences on the foundation of transpersonal history. Jung, after all, coined the word transpersonal. Much as he loved Freud's genius, they parted company because Jung felt that mankind does have a genuine spiritual nature, and that it cannot all be explained away as a kind of neurosis. There is such thing as healthy spirituality. In his collective works, Jung mentions Druidry specifically several times, and Druid-related themes on many occasions. He was obviously fascinated by the image of the Druid as an archetype, the senex, the wise person. He mentions Merlin on several occasions in this capacity. He was also deeply interested in the traditions of the Holy Grail, which he accepted as being traceable to ancient Celtic pagan Druid religious teachings. For him, the Grail represented the essence of the feminine, and this was how the lost goddess of pre-Christian European pagan wisdom was smuggled, so to speak, into the heart of European Christian civilization. He felt that without those lost feminine aspects of the deity, a dangerous lopsidedness was occurring in society and in our consciousness that is threatening the very stability and spiritual well-being of human civilization as a whole. He spent years researching primitive consciousness and pagan cultures, travelling to meet with Hopi Indian elders and with African medicine men in Kenya, looking for the lost wisdom that he felt too narrow and dogmatic a Christianity had suppressed in our cultural heritage. He was interested in dreams and visions and mysticism, and wanted to study all such phenomena from a scientific perspective. And it was this which he called transpersonal psychology. He was fascinated by alchemy because in the alchemical traditions he realised there was hidden a secret language which represented the esoteric psychological facts of the search for human transcendental experience, and also a secret code for the Western equivalent to tantric yoga, in which the feminine aspect of divinity was esteemed equally to the masculine. Jung also did an enormous service to modern scholarship with his theory of archetypes and the collective unconscious, for he provided an intellectual bridge between the ancient pagan polytheist systems, which understood the manyness of the gods, and those who nevertheless affirm a divine unity underlying them all. Jung was many things: healer, therapist, doctor, psychologist, intellectual historian, historian of religions, revealer of arcane secrets. In doing the research for this paper, I realised something else. It hit me like a thunderbolt. With his pipe, sitting in his tower beside a Swiss lake, where millennia earlier the Druid elders of the Celtic peoples of Switzerland would have communed, Deeply conversant with the mythologies and spiritual stories at the heart of all the world's religious and spiritual teachings, Jung was very much himself also a Druid, in the archetypal sense of the word. And he probably knew it. Another couple of synchronicities to report on. When World War I broke out in 1914, Jung was actually in Scotland, a country he knew and loved well. And finding himself in the wrong part of Europe, he wanted to get home. So he took a ship to Belgium and then by extraordinary luck and perseverance made it across the German lines, down the Rhine and finally back into neutral Switzerland. He felt World War I was utter madness, and since he had good friends both in Germany and the UK, refused to take sides, saying it was all a totally ridiculous waste of time. In this, he reveals himself not only a Druid, but also a peace Druid. Later, he came back to the UK to teach on several occasions and enjoyed a particular programme of teaching in Dorset, visiting some ancient Celtic remains in the region. Another field that Jung was deeply interested in was that of symbolism, and in particular the symbolism of the tree. He recognised that trees play a vital and living role in all forms of spirituality, and he was deeply interested in the Kabbalistic use of the tree image, and also in the use of the tree in alchemy, where it is called the philosophical tree. So far as we can tell, however, he was not aware of the specifics of some Druid teachings. He did not know the Taliesin legend, nor of Ceridwen, nor of Phineas Farsaith, nor the work of Geoffrey Keating, nor the Irish mythological cycles of poems. He knew Graves' work, Robert Graves, but not apparently the White Goddess. He did know James Hastings' magnificent Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, which has long articles on Druidry and the Celtic religions. He also knew Sir James Fraser's Golden Bough, which explores Druidry to some degree. Whether he met any then living Druids, I've not been able to find out, nor what he made of them. But I think I'm on safe ground when I say that probably just about every single Druid thinker or theorist, at whatever learning level, in the past 50 years, has at some point come across Jung's work. Nor is this surprising. The list of Druid matters he was deeply interested in study encompasses dreams, magic, alchemy, initiation, the mysteries, paganism, the goddess traditions, the occult, shape-shifting, animals, trees, the relationship of man to nature, shamanism, Gnosticism, ghosts, telepathy, past life experiences, the nature of God, intellectual history, the history of theology, Freemasonry, heresies, symbolism of religions, archetypes, and the symbolism of numbers, and so on and on. It should also be pointed out that Druidry figures in one particular dream sequence that Jung recounts in Memories, Dreams and Reflections, his autobiography, and which also formed part of the subject matter of an academic seminar that Jung ran in November 1925, and which was then written up as notes taken during the lecture that Jung gave at that seminar by Carey F. de Angelo. The dream images were also written up and commented on in some detail by Richard Knoll in his work. The original dream took place in December 1913 at a critical time in Jung's life, when he'd just broken with Freud. He dreamed he descended down a rocky flight of stone steps and then looked about him. He saw Elijah on a rocky place, a ring of boulders which he thought was a Druid's sacred place. Inside, the old man climbed up a mounded Druidic altar, and then both Elijah and the altar began to shrink while the walls grew larger. Jung noticed a tiny woman, like a doll, who turned out to be Salome, and also a miniature snake and a house. The dream sequence continues with Salome, who is blind, worshipping Jung's avatar and telling him he is Christ. And then quotes from the book. Then I saw the snake approach me. She came close and began to encircle me and press me in her coils. These coils reached up to my heart. I realized as I struggled that I assumed the attitude of the crucifixion. In the agony and the struggle, I sweated so profusely that the water flowed down on all sides from me. Then Salome rose, and she could see. While the snake was pressing me, I felt my face had taken on the face of an animal of prey, a lion or tiger. End of quote. In the academic seminar in 1925, which Jung held on the subject of the ancient mysteries, and which he offered an analysis of this dream as one of the contents under discussion, he had this to say: "You cannot get conscious of these unconscious facts without giving yourself to them. These images have so much reality that they recommend themselves, and such extraordinary meaning that one is caught. They form part of the ancient mysteries. In fact, it is such figures that make the mysteries." Later, Jung went on to recount the whole essence of the ancient mysteries as that of the process of deification, and that this was what had happened to him in this dream when he had become Christ. He stated, quotes, "In this deification mystery, you make yourself into the vessel, and are a vessel of creation, in which the opposites reconcile." End of quotes. This has profound resonances with Druidry and transpersonal history on many levels. Jung felt that in founding analytical psychology, he was effectively bringing to consciousness and the scrutiny of science the same innermost wisdom which had been transmitted in earlier epochs in the guise of the mystery schools, such as at Ephesus or Samothrace, or indeed in the Druid world. Blavatsky and many other esoteric writers, going back to the classical sources, argued that the Druids were the upholders of the ancient mystery schools of the Celtic and Northwest European peoples. So it is not surprising that this specifically Druidic reference should have occurred to Jung's unconscious at this key moment in his own psychological unfolding. It could be argued that the archetype of the Druid is buried deeply in the collective unconscious of every European mind. Not surprisingly then, many Jungian therapists and cultural historians have continued his work, exploring many branches of the human thought and creativity. James Hillman has developed the field of archetypal psychology, which explores how the plurality of divine archetypes still impacts on today's consciousness and today's society. I studied the intellectual history of as many Jungian thinkers as I could in the appendix to my own doctoral thesis, and discussed a huge range of Jungians inspired by Jung, who've been beavering away in many diverse seams and layers of the knowledge fields of ancient wisdom, many of them in areas directly related to Druid research. In short, the Jungian contribution to the field of transpersonal history, and potentially to the transpersonal history of Druidry, is outstanding. 3. Moving on to look at Druidry in relation to transpersonal history in general now. Now, I want to move on. Jung was a forerunner, but since him, the path of transpersonal thought and transpersonal history has moved on from strength to strength. Another key founder of the transpersonal approach to psychology was Roberto Assagioli, a brilliant Italian psychotherapist who initially was devoted to Freud, but soon left him for the same reason that Jung did, because Assagioli believed that there was indeed a spiritual essence in human nature, which cannot be explained away through pseudo-materialistic theories, however clever and convincing sounding. Assagioli lived and worked mostly in Florence, where he gradually built up an influential school of transpersonal psychotherapy, which he came to call psychosynthesis. For Assagioli, the point of therapy is not just psychoanalysis, the breaking down of the mind or soul into its constituent parts and finding out the details of what's gone wrong with it, but, finally, it was concerned to heal, to put the broken psyche back together again. And this was what he called psychosynthesis. Assagioli, in his writings and lectures, drew heavily on the ancient wisdom teachers of mankind and the lineages of great philosophers, as well as modern psychologists, to argue that there is a transcendental spark of genius in all of us, an overself, the superconsciousness, which becomes activated and alive when we reach the degree of psychic integration and wholeness that is a mark of true wellness and creative health. Assagioli emphasised the importance of will on this journey. It is not enough to know the road from the map on the spiritual and psychological journey to maturity. We also have to will ourselves to walk there. He also developed the field of active visualization in the therapeutic process, which enabled the soul to use advanced imaginal journeyings in inner work, sometimes called path workings by contemporary pagans and druids, and which in turn also came to form the basics of past life regression work. Assagioli not only supported the work of the transpersonal psychologists coming together in the latter stages of the 20th century, but he was also good friends with advanced esotericists such as Alice Bailey. He met her several times and they liked each other immensely. Jung also knew them both, since both Alice Bailey and Carl Jung shared a common friend and patron in Olga Friebe-Capetin, who sponsored not only Jung's Uranus conferences at Ascona, but also the early days of Alice Bailey's World Goodwill organisation.